Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into a really intense and often overlooked story from the Bible. It's a story about a mysterious 3-year famine, a broken promise from the past, and King David's struggle to make things right. This isn't just an ancient tale. It's packed with lessons about justice, leadership, and the serious weight of our promises. So, the scene opens with Israel in crisis. For 3 straight years, there's been a severe famine. The land is dry, crops are failing, and people are suffering. This isn't just bad weather. It's a national disaster. David, being the king, knows he needs to figure out what's going on. So, he does what a godly king should do. He inquires of the Lord. He asks God, "Why is this happening to us?" The answer he receives is probably not what he was expecting. God tells him the famine is because of King Saul and his bloody house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. Now, this is where things get interesting. Who are the Gibeonites, and what did Saul do to them? To understand that, we have to rewind the clock about 400 years, back to the time of Joshua. When the Israelites first entered the Promised Land, they were commanded to conquer the inhabitants. But the Gibeonites who lived in the land were clever. They knew they couldn't defeat Israel in battle, so they came up with a cunning plan. They dressed in worn-out clothes, put old patched-up sacks on their donkeys, and carried dry, moldy bread. They traveled to the Israelite camp and pretended to be ambassadors from a very distant country. They told Joshua and the leaders of Israel, "We've come from a far-off land because we've heard of the fame of your God and all that he did in Egypt." They basically tricked the Israelites into thinking they weren't from nearby Gibeon, and it worked. Without consulting God, Joshua and the leaders of Israel made a covenant, a solemn oath, to let the Gibeonites live. A few days later, the Israelites discovered they'd been duped. The Gibeonites lived just a few miles away. The people of Israel were furious and wanted to attack them, but the leaders said, "No, we can't. We've sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel." So, instead of destroying them, they made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the community and for the altar of the Lord. They were integrated into Israelite society, albeit in a servant role, but they were protected by a sacred, unbreakable covenant. Fast forward for centuries to the reign of King Saul. For reasons the Bible doesn't spell out, maybe in some kind of misguided zeal for Israel, Saul decided to violate this ancient treaty. He launched a campaign to wipe out the Gibeonites. He broke the oath that Israel had sworn before God. This was a massive betrayal, not just of the Gibeonites but of Israel's own word and their commitment to God. And now, generations later, under King David's rule, the consequences of Saul's actions have come back to haunt the entire nation in the form of this devastating famine. This really highlights a powerful biblical theme: generational consequences. The sins of the past, especially when they involve injustice and broken promises, don't just disappear. They can have ripple effects that are felt long after. So, David now knows the root of the problem. What does he do? He doesn't just assume he knows the solution. Instead, he goes directly to the people who were wronged. He summons the Gibeonites and asks them a crucial question. "What shall I do for you, and how shall I make atonement, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" This is a huge lesson in leadership and reconciliation. David doesn't dictate the terms. He approaches the offended party with humility and empowers them to name the price for justice. He understands that true atonement isn't about what the offender wants to give, but what the victim needs to heal and restore the relationship. He's creating a space for an open and honest conversation to address the grievance. The Gibeonites' response is intense. They say, "It is not a matter of silver or gold between us and Saul or his house, nor is it for us to put any man to death in Israel." They're not looking for financial compensation. Their hurt runs deeper than that. They want justice, and in their ancient Near Eastern culture, that meant blood for blood. They make a specific demand: "Let 7 men of his sons be given to us, so that we may hang them before the Lord at Gibeon of Saul." They want 7 of Saul's male descendants to be executed to atone for the massacre their ancestor committed. This sounds incredibly harsh to our modern ears, and it is, but it reflects the principle of corporate responsibility that was prevalent at the time. The sin was committed by the royal house, and so the atonement had to come from the royal house. David agrees to their demand. He sees this as the necessary, though painful, path to restoring justice and ending the famine that is crippling his nation. This demonstrates the immense weight of leadership accountability. David, as the current king, is responsible for rectifying the wrongs committed by his predecessor. He can't just say, "That was Saul's problem, not mine." The well-being of his entire nation depends on him making this right. But in the midst of this brutal justice, we see a moment of incredible tenderness and loyalty from David. The Bible tells us that the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son Jonathan, because of the oath of the Lord that was between them, between David and Jonathan the son of Saul. Remember that David had made his own covenant, his own sacred promise, to his best friend Jonathan. He had sworn to protect and show kindness to Jonathan's family forever. So, even while carrying out this difficult act of justice for the Gibeonites, David honors his personal oath to Jonathan. He finds a way to be just without being unfaithful. This is a masterful balancing act. He's navigating 2 different covenants, one broken and needing atonement, and one that he is determined to keep. So, David hands over 2 of Saul's sons, born to his concubine Ritzpah and 5 of Saul's grandsons. The Gibeonites take them and execute them at the beginning of the barley harvest. The bodies are left exposed, which was considered a great dishonor. And this leads to one of the most heartbreaking and powerful scenes in the entire Old Testament. Ritzpah, the mother of the 2 executed sons, takes sackcloth and spreads it on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest until the rains finally came, she stayed there, day and night, guarding the bodies of her sons and grandsons from the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. This is an image of profound maternal grief and devotion. Her silent, persistent vigil is a protest against the dishonor done to her sons. Her actions are so moving that word gets back to King David. When David hears what Ritzpah has done, he is moved to action. He realizes that justice isn't just about the execution. It's also about providing a proper and honorable burial. He goes and retrieves the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan, who had died in battle years before, and he also gathers the bones of the 7 men who were just executed. He gives them all a proper burial in the tomb of Kish, Saul's father. David's act of ensuring a dignified burial completes the process of atonement. It shows respect not just for the dead, but for the living who mourn them like Ritzpah. It's a gesture that brings a measure of closure and honor to a brutal situation. And what happens after all this? The Bible says, and after that, God responded to the prayer for the land. The famine ends, the rains come. The harmony between God, the land and the people is restored. So what can we take away from this complex and challenging story? First, the incredible importance of covenants and promises. The entire crisis began because an oath, sworn 400 years prior, was broken. This story teaches us that our words have weight, our commitments matter, and faithfulness is a cornerstone of a healthy community and a right relationship with God. God takes promises seriously, and He expects us to do the same. Second, we see a powerful model for seeking justice and reconciliation. David didn't ignore the problem or make excuses. He sought God's guidance. He went directly to the victims. He listened to their needs. And he took responsibility for making things right, even though he wasn't the one who committed the original sin. True leadership involves cleaning up the messes of the past. Third, the story reveals the tension between justice and mercy. The demand for 7 lives is harsh, but it was the culturally understood path to justice. Yet, within that framework, David carves out a space for mercy by protecting Mephibosheth, honoring his own covenant of loyalty. It shows that even in the most difficult situations, faithfulness and kindness can coexist with the demands of justice. And finally, this story points to the bigger redemptive plan of God. The concept of atonement, of a sacrifice being required to make things right, is central here. While this story involves a painful and human process, it echoes the larger biblical theme that sin has consequences and requires a payment. It subtly points forward to the ultimate atonement that would come through Jesus, where one perfect sacrifice would finally and fully deal with the injustices and brokenness of the world, not through vengeance, but through radical love and grace. This narrative from 2 Samuel is a raw, real-life example of how faith works in a broken world. It's not always neat and tidy. It involves pain, difficult choices, and confronting the ugly consequences of sin. But it also shows us a path forward, through honesty, accountability, faithfulness to our promises, and a deep desire to seek justice and restore what has been broken. It's a reminder that God's justice will ultimately prevail, and that He calls us to be agents of that justice and reconciliation in our own world. Thanks so much for watching today. This was a heavy one, but I think it's so important. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into these incredible stories. See you next time and God bless.